These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have a big show today. In our third hour, Greg Pallas is gonna drop by from Europe. Actually, I think he's in Portugal today. But anyhow, I had no idea that Greg has a history in Haiti, and he's got a piece out that I want to share with you, or have him share with you, that he titles "U.S. Cannibals in Haiti." As you can imagine, it has to do with the exploitation of the island. In our second hour, I want to get into, first of all, Lala Wu is going to be with us to describe the horrors of the Republican voter suppression attempt down in Texas and what's going on with the Texas legislators who have fled that state. And a question that Amy Vanderpool has in her newsletter today How do you handle anti-vaxxer friends and family who say, hey, let's get together and stuff like that? And she's got some very elegant solutions, or one in particular, that I want to share with you, and also solicit your thoughts and experiences on that. But I want to start with crime. Crime is, in many ways, something that the Republicans historically have used to win elections. New York City is a great example of this. If you look at the changes that happened after Mayor Dinkins, for example, and all around the country. I mean, this is Richard Nixon's shtick in 1968 was law and order, and I think that crime is just terribly misunderstood in the United States. The piece I published today over at the HartmannReport.com, it tells the story of what happened to Louise and me yesterday. Yesterday, a burglar tried to break into our house. You know, we have a doorbell that, like so many people have, you know, a doorbell that records what's going on. And, you know, this person came up and checked out the front of our house. There's a sliding glass door over next to the main door, you know, a little farther down the house, and went over and tried to open the sliding glass door, tried to open another sliding glass door. You know, we were lucky. We were still in bed. This was very early in the morning. We were lucky that, you know, around 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. And we were lucky that all our doors were locked. But this person went 3 houses down from us and broke into a neighbor's house and, you know, stole a bunch of stuff and absolutely terrified the neighbor who was home. And, you know, by the time the police arrived, the burglar was long gone in a stolen car. I have a friend who's trying to sell a condo in downtown Portland. And the problem is that, you know, there are parts of downtown Portland that have basically turned into giant homeless camps where there's tents everywhere. There is a lot of crime associated with that. And, you know, it's just, it's killing property values, shall we say, but it's also creating concern. And I think it's really important that we understand what is causing this kind of crime, and also what is causing the violent crime that we're seeing an uptick in. I mean, you know, we had a mass shooting in Portland the day before yesterday, in fact. And it's gotten so bad that, by the way, I mean, the police are like just now largely ignoring an awful lot of crime, or not able to deal with it. Part of that, of course, has to do with the fact that in a lot of cities, police forces have dropped in their numbers by 10 to 20%. I don't know if that's, I know that that's not normal attrition. We don't know what percentage of that has to do with people having long COVID, which is a problem across the country, but particularly with first responders, you know, who were basically forced into confronting the virus before they were vaccinated. Or what percentage of it is the bad apples, in quotes, in police departments. I mean, you know, I had speculated, based on my experience going through the Georgia Police Academy, that maybe as many as a third of police officers were, you know, really enjoyed beating people up and were on power trips. That's what I personally experienced, hanging out with guys who were working to become police officers. But let's say it's 10 or 20%. Those may well be the people who are leaving police forces now because after the George Floyd thing and after Chauvin getting convicted, they're like, oh, well, you know, can't do that anymore. Let's find another job. I don't know. Maybe you do, and if you do, give me a call. But the point is that we've got this, quote, crisis, and I guarantee you it is going to be highly politicized going into 2022. And the Republicans are going to be repeating every Democrat who ever said defund the police, and doing so largely out of context, because nobody is saying stop having community interventions. I mean, even the defund the police movement was really about, and you know, as Seattle has done, and as Portland, I believe, is in the process of doing, yeah, and other cities as well, is, you know, there are times when it's better to send somebody other than an armed police officer to a situation. But, you know, that's kind of a side conversation. In fact, probably one that we can deal with after the break. But what I wanted to point out is that what causes society to come unraveled, and crime is a symptom of that, particularly property crime, which you could argue is a form of violence, a violent crime as well. But what causes society to become unraveled isn't what we think it is. We have this mythology, this story in our culture that crime always accompanies poverty. And there is, of course, a measurable association between low levels of crime and poverty, but it's almost entirely contained within the poor communities. And crime, you know, I've worked in places where there were genuinely poor people. I worked in a famine, literally. You know, hundreds of people dying a day around me in Uganda in 1980 after the war with Idi Amin. I worked in a massive slum in Colombia, in Bogota. I worked in the Klong Toy slum briefly with Bernie Cooper and Dwayne Prateep with the Dwayne Prateep Foundation. They were trying to build sidewalks that were not flammable because the giant Japanese corporation that owned the swamp that the slum was built over kept trying to burn them out because the local laws said you can't take back over your property unless there's no people on it. You know, I've seen deep poverty. I was in the Philippines with this guy, Father Ben Carrion. He's now passed away, but he used to write a column for the Manila Times called Joke Only. He's using humor to make social points. Very progressive priest. And he took me to one of the largest garbage dumps in Manila. And I mean, literally, it's like miles of giant piles of garbage. And the stench was horrible and flies and everything. And he said, now look at that pile over there. And it was like, you know, a quarter mile away. Look at that pile. What do you see? And I stared at it for a minute. And I said, oh, my God, it's moving. And he said, yes, those are children. There's children all over that garbage collecting food for their families and things that they can sell. And, you know, so I've seen all these things. And one of the things, and I've hung out with people living in these very dire situations, as well as, you know, when I was much younger, among very poor people in the United States. And what you find is that at a certain level, poverty actually consolidates community. People come together in a way. You know, when thieves, particularly I remember in the barrio in Bogota, there was one guy who was stealing from other people, and the community got together and just went in and just read him the riot act and beat him up. And he stopped stealing from people. So what is it, if it's not poverty that causes crime, what is it? Well, it turns out it's inequality. And inequality causes crime because it literally makes us crazy. We are wired for fairness. If you don't believe this, walk into a preschool class with, you know, a couple of dozen 3-year-olds and give one of them a big pile of cookies and give just one cookie to all the other kids and watch what happens. There will be an explosion. We are wired for fairness. And it's not just humans. This is a mammalian thing. You can do this, you could do the exact same experiment with rats. You can do it with dogs. You can do it with great apes. I mean, right across the mammalian kingdom, we are wired for fairness. So this is one of the reasons why in pre-literate societies around the world, and there are still many of them, what the Northwest Native Americans call the potlatch, which is, you know, a big festival where everybody gets together, and the way that you gain social status is by giving away the most you can. Fairness, equality. Now, I'm not suggesting, you know, as Karl Marx did, that everybody should be stripped of all riches and the state should decide who gets what and start distributing things equally. I'm not even close to going there. You know, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. You know, it was a nice saying. It didn't work out. But what I am saying is that we have become the most unequal society in the world, or at least in the developed world. We hit, about 4 years ago, we hit levels of inequality in the United States that were equal to what we saw in 1929 that precipitated the Republican Great Depression. And there is such a pile of research on this showing that it is inequality that causes crime, more so than poverty. Yes, poverty will cause crime, but inequality is the big driver because it breaks down social trust. Social trust is the essential piece that keeps a society together, that keeps the fabric of a society together. You feel safe walking down a street because of social trust. You feel unsafe walking down a street because of a lack of social trust. And what destroys social trust? Inequality and conspicuous consumption. One of the studies that I cite in the piece over at HartmannReport.com today is specifically about the perception of inequality. When there is conspicuous consumption, people stop behaving in a social way, people who are not among the consuming class. And what did we see today? A giant penis taking off from Texas, going into the sky, you know, another Amazon penis, you know, and billionaires in space, sitting around going, oh yeah, we're billionaires, we can go into space, so maybe someday you can too. Does this help us? Or is this our problem? I'm saying it's our problem, and it's time to essentially tax the rich. You've got Jeff Bezos. In 2011, if you paid $5 in income taxes, you paid more income taxes than Jeff Bezos, the guy who just launched himself into space. Is that fair? Well, of course it's not, and everybody knows it. And when people get that society is massively unfair, that's the point at which they say, you know, screw the rules. I'm going to go out and get what I want. I'm going to steal from somebody.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I'm guessing that an awful lot of this crime is never even reported to the police and is not showing up in the statistics. Are you noticing this same situation in your community? And welcome back. Grace, whoops, application must close. Please check log. I think I just lost my call screen software, but I'll bring it right back up again. There we go. Grace in Naperville, Illinois. Hey, Grace, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I know you're going to talk about Haiti in the second hour, and I'm calling about Haiti. I'm on the board of a children's home there, and people are asking me, what's it like for the people in Haiti? Well, I don't know. I'm not there, but our founder is there 24/7, and he received a letter, an awesome letter, from a priest who had started 2 hospitals there. What I'd like to do is send you that letter, and maybe you would want to read sections that really tells what the people are going through that you don't get on the news media. And if I could email that to you, you might want, I've highlighted key sections, and you can see if you think your people will be, your listeners will be interested, and just read those parts, and if not, just discard it.
Yeah, you can try. My email address is on thomhartmann.com. Just be sure that there are no political words in the email, because the spam filter will catch those, and it'll just go right to spam. So. Okay, will somebody see it right away? It comes to me.
Okay, real good. I'll get it on its way. I'll check it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay,
thanks a lot for the call. Joe is listening to Sirius XM, so I'll pick you up after the break. I think, though, that there was, this is so funny. Nate noticed this morning on a website that he was visiting. 2 headlines side by side, right? 2 absolutely side by side headlines. And I think that this demonstrates the irony of the moment that we're in. The one headline is, Biden calls Cuba a failed state and communism a failed system. Okay, well, you know, as a consequence of our embargo, certainly Cuba is in a crisis right now. And you know, we can have opinions about the communist government in Cuba and, you know, all those kind of things, but anyhow, so that stands. Biden calls Cuba a failed state and communism a failed system. The headline right next to it is, girl 7 years old, sells lemonade to pay for her own brain surgery. Seriously, this is where we're at? This is where we're at. It's amazing. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I just got a quick question pertaining H.R. 1, the voting rights bill. Do you know if there's any language in the bill that criminalizes suppression of the vote the way they are doing in all of these states? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you, Tom.
You know, I don't know if the bill specifically criminalizes suppressing the vote. Although I suppose, no, because it basically it says federal law supersedes state law. The state law can't be enforced if it does this or this or this, and which is very much like what the Voting Rights Act said. And arguably then, with that law in place, if some state tried to say, okay, count the jelly beans in the jar, or whatever little game they're going to play, this week, there could be criminal penalties. But I'm not sure. Anyhow, I'll be right back. It's coming up on 22 minutes past the hour here in the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We have all sorts of goodies for you over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com. We have a free newsletter that Sue puts together every day that has a link to every single story that I talk about on the air every single day. If you want to do your homework and check out what's going on. We also publish at hartmannreport.com, no advertisements or anything, my daily rant, which is basically the main rant that I do on the program. And in addition to that, for people who are supporters of the program over at thomhartmann.com or have signed up, we have a weekly little short video rant. And the one this week is about how the far-right militia groups are recruiting new members. And this is amazing. Eamon Bundy, in fact, he stormed a hospital in Washington State to defend a woman who didn't want to take a COVID test, even though she wanted to have a procedure in the hospital. They're raising money and getting new members with anti-vaxxer propaganda. So just a heads up on that one. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I wanted to then segue, as the old radio word, from inequality, which is, solving inequality is not something that's going to happen next week, right? If Jeff Bezos went from paying 1% income tax to paying 40% income tax tomorrow, and the Walton family started paying any little bit of income tax, and on and on, right? If the billionaires among us started paying their fair share of taxes, which they are not. I mean, we've got this study from ProPublica. The average across the billionaires that they studied was between 1% and 3% that they're paying in federal income taxes. And if we were to institute Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, that is a long-term solution. It took us 40 years to get here, from Reagan dropping the top tax rate of 74% on individuals and 50% on corporations down to 25% on both. It took us 40 years to get from that through the dynasty, changes in the 1980s, where TV stopped showing normal people like Lucille Ball and Jackie Gleason in their inexpensive apartments and started showing rich people and big mansions, and now everybody looks like they live rich. And we saw this explosion of wealth, not just among the top 1/1000%, which is where it's most obscene, but right across the board, across largely the top 1%. That took 4 decades. It took 40 years to reach the point where we are the most unequal society, advanced, developed society on Earth. And the one that's closest behind us, and then there's this huge gap between us and everybody else, the one that's closest behind us is Maggie Thatcher's England, because Maggie Thatcher did to the UK the same thing Ronald Reagan did to the United States. But that's the long-term strategy. My question for you is the short-term strategy. It seems to me that we need to do a couple of things with regard to policing. The top one on my list is bringing back community policing, getting cops out of cars and on the streets. walking around and not looking like they are, Nazi stormtroopers, but looking like average people, like we used to see on TV, like on Cagney and Lacey or on Adam 1, Macmillan and Wife. Go back and look at the cop shows from the 70s and 80s. Normal people policing in normal neighborhoods.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But I want to crowdsource these solutions. Should we outlaw homelessness? Do we do health care, housing, food, and education? What are your thoughts on how we solve this problem? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at HartmannReport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, ThomHartmann.com. So just to kind of put a punctuation mark on my last rant, and then I will pick up your phone calls in just a moment. But I just want to amplify the points that I was making very slightly. Number one, I see that we have this long-term problem of inequality that Republican policies have created, and we're going to have to reverse to solve. But you're going to start seeing the solutions to that come out over a decade or 2 decades. But what do we do right now? Just in my little circle of family and friends, one of my family members has had 2 vehicles stolen. Another one of my family members has had a vehicle broken into. One of the people I work with has had a smash and grab vehicle broken into. The vast majority of these, and I've had my house, attempted to be burglarized, and this is all just in the last year. And I'm guessing that 9 out of 10 of these kinds of crimes are just never reported to the police. So what do we do? It seems to me that, number one, we need more community policing. I mentioned that before the break. We need to get cops out into communities, and we need them to be members of the community and to look like the community rather than to be an occupying force of mutant Ninja Turtles. And this means reversing the whole hyper-militarization of the police to a large extent. I get it that, you know, there are going to be times when you need SWAT teams and you need heavily armed people when you're going into gang, you know, wars and stuff. I get all that. But, you know, not for everything. Number one. Number two, we need to do something about homelessness in the United States. Finland just made homelessness essentially illegal. And it doesn't mean that they made homeless people illegal. They made any government policy that promotes homelessness illegal. And their solution was to give homes to homeless people. And they are building low-cost housing for people or no-cost housing for people. And they are putting up homeless people in vacant properties that they are acquiring. And Finland is like just a whisker away from ending homelessness in that country. We could do that here. Though, you know, talk to somebody who's old enough to remember the 60s, 70s, and the 80s before Reagan shut down the mental hospitals and before we started seeing this, and before, you know, the working class got gutted by Reaganism and the loss of unions. We did not have a homeless problem in the United States. Certainly there were some people who were not living in a house, you know, who kind of like the old hobos from the 30s, but it wasn't anything like today. So let's outlaw homelessness. And let's just establish a baseline. This is the simple baseline that has been established by every other developed country in the world, is that healthcare is a right and therefore everybody has it at no cost when they can't afford it. Housing is a right and therefore everybody has it even if it has to be at no cost because they can't afford it. Food is a right, and therefore everybody has it even if they can't afford it. And education is a right, and everybody has access to education even if they can't afford it. Again, this is not Marxism or communism. This is creating a social floor in these four central areas that, in addition to more rational policing, I believe will solve this problem. But what do we do with it? What do we do with it? Anyhow, Bill in Sierra Blanca, Texas. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yes, what you were saying about inequality causing crime really resonated with me. In fact, I got a little emotional. And also, real quick, I live about 30 miles from Van Horn, Texas. That's where Bezos blasted off from, the billionaire in space today. But
yeah.
anyway, I watched that. But anyway, I'm not proud of it, Tom. But in the past, I used to, when I was struggling, I was on even food stamps for a while, and I'm not proud of it, but I literally stole thousands of dollars of food from big box stores and high-end food stores. And I'd buy stuff, you know, but I'd also steal a lot. Over time, I'm sure it was many thousands of dollars. And later, you know, that's not how I was raised. My mom, you know, my dad was a border patrolman. My mom was a teacher, and I wasn't raised like that. But my wife at the time asked my sister-in-law, who was a psychologist practicing in California, San Francisco, and she said, well, I think he feels like people owe him something. And so, and you know, I never would steal like from regular people. It was always from like a Walmart or a big box store or someone I felt that was taking advantage. So I just wanted to share that because it really resonated with me and what you were saying. So
would it be fair to say, Bill, that you felt that the massive inequality you were seeing around you meant that you know, it was more legitimate to basically steal from the rich?
Yeah, I think so, because, you know, I wasn't going to name names, but one of them was Walmart and their sister store, Sam's. And you know, I had friends working there, and they were making, like, at the time, like $8 an hour, you know? Yeah. And then I would read that these people in you know, and the owners of the Waltons are multi-billionaires.
Oh, the richest family in America. They're worth over $100 billion.
Yeah, so I'm sure that was a part of it. You know, I felt like they owe us something. And of course, in retrospect, stealing is stealing. It's a crime. It's wrong. But I completely understand now that what you're saying, Tom, inequality does cause crime.
And if you look at the French Revolution, everybody talks about Les Mis. There were literally famines in France, which, in my opinion, justifies stealing food. But I don't think the French Revolution came about because of the famines. I think it came about because, I mean, look at pictures of the Palace of Versailles, where Louis XVI was living. The opulence, the conspicuous consumption among the French aristocracy was just mind-boggling, and I think I think it also leads. It doesn't just lead to crime. I think it also leads to revolution, which is a very, very dangerous state. And again, you look at these people who are hardcore Trump followers, and many of them are following him in part because they believe that, his old campaign promises that he was going to tax the rich and distribute wealth to average people or to poor people. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a sense of that there too. Bill, thank you for the call. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Hello. I just briefly, Bill's call was very profound to me. And one of the things he said is stealing, which is really strange. And I've spent half a century trying to figure out how certain people in the United States bifurcate or rationalize things. Do they think about the things they say? Because if stealing is stealing, then we've got a big problem, because we live in a nation that was stolen from other people, and we still steal from Africa, which has most of the planet Earth's natural resources. So I really want to put that in there, and that kind of is a segue. You used that word earlier. I like that word. And to what you're talking about inequality, to me, and I say this with due respect to all, it's a specious and really white supremacist concept in a way. And I mean in a way. And that's why, and what I mean by that is, who am I wanting to be equal to as a black man? Who am I wanting to be equal to? Well, of course, the inference is, and the reality is, not just an inference, is a white man. Okay, do I want to be equal in terms of wearing pajamas with a pillowcase on my head and burning crosses? How you see, this is very complex.
I think we're talking about different things, Kenyatta, respectfully. If you look at over at equalitytrust.co.uk, you can see all these charts where they show, it's called the Gini coefficient, the ratio between the very, very rich and everybody else. And as that Gini coefficient goes up, as inequality goes up, crime goes up, mental illness goes up, violent crime goes up, teenage pregnancy goes up, drug abuse goes up, all of these social ills, and they're all being caused by social trust being unraveled by the perception of massive wealth in the midst of people who don't have access to even what they basically need. That's what I'm talking about.
I don't disagree with, I'm very familiar with criminalistics, and I don't disagree with you at all. I'm simply saying that, again, you know, we have to look at not just the what, but the why. It's a deeper issue than that. You take homelessness. It's a complicated issue, Tom. There are people that are homeless because, you know, they have burned every family member, they've stolen from family members, they have drug problems, they don't want help. I live in an area of Southern California where the homelessness problem is just, it's unreal.
Yeah, it is here in Portland, too.
And sometimes these people can be violent. What do you do? 2 years ago, I got a phone call that my only really living relative that I had any familiarity with had died. And she was in her 40s, and she died she had been in a homeless shelter in Orange County, California.
Ouch.
And she finally got an apartment. She had outreach, and she wasn't a drug addict, none of those things, but she suffered from depression and alcoholism. And she had gotten into this apartment. She had waited 1.5 years. She lived on the streets because the homeless shelters were so dangerous. women were raped. They were full of. So this is complicated because it gets down to the values of the society. Where are we putting money? Why do we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on military armament and drones and things when we could put that money in our schools? We could put that money to deal with people, wherever they're homeless, whether it be drugs or mental incapacity or just lost their job at GM. But that's not happening, Tom. That's what I'm saying.
No, you're singing my song, Kenyatta. You're absolutely singing my song. And just 2 weeks ago, my wife, Louise, was on a walk, and a homeless guy assaulted her. You know, I mean, he threw a water bottle at her and tried to chase her down the street. And somebody else intervened. A person in a home nearby came out and started yelling at him. He turned around and ran away. He was a very, very large guy, and it scared the crap out of her. And this is mental illness that as a society, we used to deal with. And we need to be dealing with in an appropriate way. I mean, we didn't used to deal with it perfectly, obviously. It was a terrible system in many regards, and it was a very racist system, and I acknowledge all that. But you know, what we've decided to do since Reagan basically stopped any viable government-funded option for mentally ill people who were homeless is that we've just said, oh yeah, they're crazy, just let them live in the tent over there. You know,
absolutely, Tom. You are so right. And you know what? Along with that, when Reagan came in, think about college tuition. I was right at the cusp of that. I got a basic educational opportunity grant, worked part-time, played in bands, and guess what? I paid my way through college with no college loans. You're absolutely right, and the things are tied.
Yeah. It's all one thing in my mind. Kenyatta, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. And I love reading your stuff over at Op-Ed News. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
48 minutes past the hour, back with more of your calls. How do we solve the, quote, crime problem in America? And welcome back. Ruth in West Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I always love it when you rant on Reagan because he was so awful, and it's really great when you enumerate all the ways. And pardon my being off color, but we know what body fluid trickled down, and it wasn't money.
Yeah.
But exactly. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that you are absolutely right about kids realizing inequality. And my personal story is that I grew up in Alabama, and I had the good fortune of living in a home. And right next door to me was a tenement house. And there was my playmate, who was a 5-year-old girl. I think that their, rooming house, they probably had 2 rooms, possibly 3. Both her parents were deaf and mute, and she was sign languaging them as a 5-year-old. And this had a profound effect on me. I was like, I realized as a 5-year-old that it wasn't fair that my life was not, difficult like her life was. And also, I saw a lot of poverty amongst African Americans, shacks with roosters running around, and those were all mixed in, with regular houses, et cetera. So it had a profound effect on me. I became really, literally a civil rights worker at the age of 5. I mean, it politicized me at that age, and I kept asking my mother, why are there 2 drinking fountains in the park? Why are there 2, waiting rooms at the railroad station? The bottom line is it had a profound effect. When I was in college and I took genetics, there was a paper out that was in the Harvard Educational Review by a man named Arthur Jensen, which purported to show why blacks were mentally inferior to whites. And I decided that was going to be my genetics project. And I read the whole thing. It was a big, thick, it took up the whole journal. And it was full of holes. and it was really easy to shoot it down. But, you know, what I'm saying is that it came to me that I needed to do my genetics paper on that. I'm just saying from a 5-year-old to that.
It seems, Ruth, that some people, if I can just interject real quick,
sure.
that some of us, when we perceive inequality, say, we've got to fix this. Others of us, when we perceive inequality, say, this system is totally screwed up. I have no use for it anymore. I'm going to become a criminal. And I think the thing that distinguishes between the two is that those of us who say, I want to fix it, are the people who feel that they have some agency. And the people who say, I'm going to become a criminal, are the people who feel that they have lost all agency. Now, that's just speculation on my part, you know, but the sense of powerlessness versus a sense of capability to do something, I think that's important.
That is really true. And the birth accident of having the capability to
Well,
do
that's what
it.
brings it about. I mean, you know, what I'm talking about here in part is white privilege, although it's really class privilege as much as anything else. I mean, most of the crime here in Portland is being committed by white people. So it's not a race issue, it's a class issue. But Ruth, I got to run. Thank you very much for the call, and thank you for your story. That was a great one. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We try to have a lot of content over at thomhartmann.com. And, of course, every day my daily rant goes up at hartmannreport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, you know, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at thomhartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at thomhartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Professor. Hey, y'all. Yes, thanks for the book, Crash of 2016. And thank you. And one of the solutions to crime is try to replace private security with a lot of police aides to actually walk the streets instead of guarding a few expensive condos.
Yeah, well, that's my point about community policing. Community policing is where the police get out of their cars and they get into their communities. But you put your finger on it, David, and did a great job of it. Thank you. Mary in Seattle. Hey, Mary, your thoughts?
Hey, thank you. Yeah, Mary in Seattle. I'm an older white woman. This is Duwamish and Coast Salish land that I'm on. And I'm just grateful for the discussion of inequity and our longing for fairness, and without which we have gone crazy in so many ways. And I also appreciate earlier caller Kenyatta, I think, bringing in white supremacy, bringing in addiction and mental health into the mix. I wanted to put forward something that's growing in local jurisdictions, school districts, and local governments, and that is restorative justice practices. And you probably covered this before, Tom, but it's a really important kind of community-based, community-owned form of conflict resolution and crime prevention. In addition to your suggestion of community policing, I think it's at least as important as any reform of policing. And there's lots of examples of restorative justice, peacemaking circle practices out here in King County, where I live, are being used in schools, I believe, as well as in the juvenile justice system. And it's a really important way of bringing community into concept.
Mary, we're going to hit a break in about 30 seconds. Can you give us your quick definition of restorative justice?
Yeah, it's community-based safety is what it is. It brings people together.
Helping restore communities to functionality, essentially?
Exactly. Restoring relationships, so many of which have been absolutely broken and leaves so many of us unaccountable to each other. So it's a way of bringing people together again. There's many practices, very specific ways to do it, that restore relationships and therefore restore safety to our communities.
It's all about relationships. And this is my point, that inequality makes people crazy. It tears apart social trust. And I'm going to have to do a deep dive on restorative justice now, Mary. Thank you very much for that. I've heard the phrase many times. I've never really dug into it, and I need to. In fact, maybe we'll make that part of our rant tomorrow. Thank you, Mary. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by France Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wanted to check in with, what's going on in Texas. What's the state of this attempted anti-democracy legislation that the Republicans are working so hard on? On the line with us is Lala Wu, the co-founder and executive director of the Sister District Project. That website, sisterdistrict.com. Bringing women into politics. Sister_district is the Twitter handle, as well as _Lala, Lala _Wu, WU _. Lala Wu, welcome. Lala, welcome to the program. So glad to have you with us. Can you give us the details of the Texas, the proposed Texas legislation and why it's consequential?
Thanks, Tom. So glad to be here. In Texas, already has some of the toughest voting laws in the country, and Republicans are trying to make them even tougher. And I think it's important to put this in a national context that there have already been 17 states that have passed 28 laws restricting voting, and all of these are pushed by Republicans that are premised on the big lie that, of course, somehow Biden didn't win the election. And with the Texas law in particular, it truly is, I mean, a real parade of horribles. And I think what's important to note here is that it's not random. It's not just Republicans throwing spaghetti at the wall of what do they think might restrict voters, and in particular voters of color. The background here is that in 2020, Harris County, which is where Houston is, they rolled out a bunch of new measures during the pandemic to help people vote. This includes drive-through voting, which 1 in 10 early voters took advantage of, expanded voting hours. They automatically sent ballots to eligible voters. They had 24-hour voting in the form of drop boxes. And what happened was that even though Republicans brought some litigation to challenge it, voter of colors prevailed, and they really benefited from these expanded measures, and there was the highest turnout in 30 years. And now fast forward to where we are now, and of course the Texas law wants to restrict all of these things. They want to ban drive-through voting. They want to get rid of those expanded voting hours. They want to eliminate 24-hour drop boxes. And they want to ban, mailing ballots to eligible voters, even criminalizing certain aspects of that process. And on top of that, they also want to add more protections for partisan poll workers, which really allow them to roam free and intimidate folks. We know that groups like the Proud Boys and other Trump-aligned Trump supporters have been recruited in the past to come to Harris County and to basically stand and, act as so-called poll watchers, and create havoc in that way. They also want to criminalize, things like small clerical errors. And that's not the direction that we need to go in this country when it comes to how to vote. So the list goes on and on. There's new ID requirements for voting by mail, new requirements for people who are trying to help other people to vote. And the list, like I said, goes on and on and on. But this is really a very, very targeted attempt by the Texas Republicans to restrict all of the ways that Harris County in particular, which has a large urban Black and brown population, were able to successfully expand the electorate.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court has essentially said if the law doesn't say you can't vote if you're a person of color, if it doesn't say those words, basically, it doesn't matter. That partisan gerrymandering, partisan restrictions on voting are just fine, and yet the partisan lines, since 1968, when the Republican Party embraced white supremacy with Nixon's Southern strategy, the partisan divide has become also a racial divide in the United States.
Exactly.
And it just blows my mind that well, it doesn't actually, given who John Roberts is and the work that he did. I mean, one of his major projects when he worked in the Reagan White House in Reagan's Department of Justice was trying to find ways around the Brown versus Board of Education law. He wrote a whole long paper on it. That's right. Suggesting ways to get around Brown v. Board, as well as Roe v. Wade. Which I lay out in my book on the Supreme Court. But it's you just look at the history of these people; it's just amazing. So, we're talking with Lala Wu, the co-founder and executive director of the Sister District Project. Sisterdistrict.com is the website. So what are you hearing from your collaborators and colleagues in Texas about how people are pushing back on this? And if the Republicans succeed in getting this law passed, which actually looks like it's probable, I mean, at a certain point, these Democrats are going to have to go home. What will the fallout be? I mean, I've seen some optimists, for example, saying, these laws against voting in Georgia, well, as you said, 17 states now, they're going to cause more Democrats to show up, and people are going to be super energized, sort of like the way Donald Trump, a lot of people showed up in the 2020 election, not so much to vote for Joe Biden, but to vote against Donald Trump. Is that optimism justified, or will these voter suppression efforts be sufficiently successful to crush voter turnout in the next election in 2022?
I think that if this law passes, it is going to be a huge blow to Democrats in Texas, but that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. There are really strong community-based organizations in Texas, Texas Organizing Project as an example of one of them, that really focus on building a strong electorate, a strong voter base, and turning people out despite all odds. Like I mentioned, Texas already has some of the strictest voting laws in the country. And, no matter what happens, folks on the ground will be fighting tooth and nail, doing everything they can within the new laws to turn people out. So, I would say nothing is for certain. We can't, take our eye off the ball. We have to continue to stay focused, continue to support the organizers and the Democrats in the state who are doing this hard work of fighting back. And, what we are hearing on the ground, for example, Sister District, we build progressive power in state legislators and support state legislative swing district races. And last year, our alumni Representative Ann Johnson was the only red to blue flip in Texas, and she represents parts of Harris County, which is, as I mentioned, where Houston is located. She has become one of the leading voices in the walkout, and, along with over 50 Democrats, as you mentioned, who left the state to break quorum and stop this bill from being rammed through, they're risking arrest and electoral challenges, even stronger electoral challenges when they get back to the state when they're up for re-election. I mean, one of them even missed her wedding. And so people are really putting themselves out on the line. And, I appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation, to continue to shine light on this very, very, serious issue that we need to continue to support the folks.
I saw a report on TV last night, and I'm assuming that it's credible. It was on either CNN or MSNBC. That said that, for example, in Georgia, when they declared that there was going to be a special election, that Reverend Warnock ran in, as I recall, or in Arizona, you had this special election with Mark Kelly, that in Texas, when you declare a special election, you have either 4 or 6 months from the time that it's declared and people throw their hat into the ring until the time that the election happens. And so there's plenty of time there for people who might be excited by that special election or particularly invigorated by the possibility of a candidate they like to register to vote. So under this new law in Texas, what they're saying is that special elections have to happen within 28 days. And once you register to vote, you may not vote for the first time until the 29th day, which prevents people from voting in special elections if that's the thing that they're trying to address. I mean, it's just crazy, the granularity of this. And go ahead.
And here's the thing, Tom. I mean, Republicans are just merciless, right? Yeah. They just are highly targeted and strategic, and they take no prisoners when it comes to passing legislation that benefits themselves.
Yeah, just like the old South. It's amazing. Lala Wu, the co-founder and executive director of SisterDistrict.com is the website, SisterDistrict.com. Sister_district also over on Twitter. Lala, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
You too. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. We'll be right back. It's 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I'm still, with this question, how do we deal with not just inequality, but crime and homelessness in America? How can we best deal with it? And welcome back. Michael in Denver. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Tom, I just turned on. I got you on when you were talking about community policing, which is, I think very necessary. It's not just an excellent idea. This should be standard operating procedure across our country, every city, every village, to have.
And it largely used to be.
Yes, I know. Now, you were born on May 7th. I was born on November 12th. So we're, we could say we're almost connected at the hip from birth. I like you, I'm a progressive, but I took another turn where you went out into the world, and did great things, businesses and everything else, and educated yourself. A big portion of what I did was for the United States Navy for 22 years.
Oh, good on you,
Michael. I traveled, and thank you. I traveled and I saw a lot of what I'm just going to say humanity and how they lived. And it seems to me like we pushed back. We've gone back in many ways to, like I'm going to say, the 1920s, 30s maybe.
Yeah.
But what I also wanted to add, and I'll be brief here, when I was growing up in Brooklyn, New York, we used to have community centers. And what were they? They were the public schools that were manned by policemen, firemen, veterans, people from the community, moms and dads that could do that, that wanted to do that. And I got to be, Brooklyn, crime for sure. Back in the 1950s and 60s when I was growing up, for sure. But we also had a sense of community. I remember being, 13 years old, being out till 1, 2 in the morning because school was out. We were playing handball, okay? Girls were playing hopscotch under the streetlights. Parents looked out at the windows from the apartment buildings, the tenements, as people call them. There was a lot of life. There was a lot of value there, and there were blue-collar, working-class people that lived there and cared, the vast majority, about their community.
Yeah, and made a decent living. I mean, those old enough to remember the Honeymooners, the Jackie Gleason show or the I Love Lucy show. Well, Lucy didn't have a union job, but Jackie Gleason, his character did, as did Art Carney's character.
So did Desi. He was a musician.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, Desi Arnaz, yeah. So, I mean, they were good union jobs, or at least, tolerable union jobs. And you didn't get rich, but you were okay. You were taken care of. You had decent pay. You had good benefits. You had your medical. You had a retirement. You had a pension. Reagan gutted all that. When he came into office, it was a third of America had a union job, and another third of America had the equivalent of a union job because the union jobs set the local wage floor and benefits floor. And now it's 6% of the American population, which means maybe 12% of Americans have a decent. And this is why 4 years ago we dropped below the 50% point for the American middle class. It was 65% when Reagan came into office of Americans were in the middle class. And now it's in the 40s. And no wonder there's people saying this society doesn't work, to hell with it. I'm just going to steal what I need. Michael, thank you for the call. Excellent points all. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be back in just 1 minute. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day,
every day. Comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. Teresa in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Well, you know, you were talking about, I love what you said, that we're wired for equality or fairness or whatever, and I agree with that. But what made me think about a little microcosm, by the way, I love Ruth, love the things Ruth said. Mm-hmm. Bless her. Yes, that just was so inspiring today. Thanks, Ruth. Anyway, you know, I was a few years ago here in Asheville, you know, there's a lot of these companies that come out with the pyramid, you know, where you try to get at the top. And so I went to this meeting for a relatively new company, and the gal that they flew in to talk about it looked at me in the audience, and she said, "Wouldn't you like to win a Mercedes if you get to the top of your
these pyramid marketing schemes? There's a word for them, but which I'm missing.
No, I know.
Yeah.
And she laughed. I go, no, I would not want to win a Mercedes because I just would feel immoral driving around in Mercedes. There are so many homeless people in this town. And are you kidding me? And well, she was so upset because, of course, she thought I was going to say, yeah, I want to win a Mercedes.
Yeah.
And a lady came up to her, she said, "I never thought about it. Your answer was so interesting." And I said, "A Mercedes?" But, you know, that's just, she was appealing then to you know, if you want to get in here, you can have status, you can have, you know, all kinds of people that admire you and all. And I thought about that today when you were talking about that you know, that just really hit me. And then I think she quickly moved on to someone else. But anyway, I just thought I'd tell you that. And sometime in the future, I won't take your time right now because there's so many callers, but sometime I want to tell you a little personal story about a wonderful experience I had with a homeless man here in Asheville. And my husband died. He came in, he was in South Africa. He was so brilliant. He was educated, but he lived off the grid. He lived in great big boxes with, they were refrigerator boxes. Mm-hmm. But that man was so brilliant. He taught me about music. He taught me about so many things. Wow. And he's since passed away, but I am so happy that I opened my heart up to him. Yeah. But I'll tell you about him sometime. But there's an example, rare, I guess, but he really was a blessing in my life. So, you know, I love you, Tom.
Thank you, Teresa. And I think the lesson of your story is at the end of the day, we're all just people here.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
It really is. Teresa, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. I really appreciate it. Ben in Wilmington, Delaware. Hey, Ben, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. I love your work. I want to just say I work for the largest industry for community standards. I'm a healthcare worker for 14 years under hospice, and the medical entity has been talked about since the HEROES Act during this whole shenanigans that we're going through right now. And what I want to say is this is in regards to corporate greed and profits over industries in the healthcare industry that basically use us like guinea pigs through this whole scenario. And we're trying to do community standards like cops and firefighters, but we don't get pensions. We don't get any of that stuff, okay? And this is the backbone of our country right now. And if you don't want inflation, I tell you what, you better support your healthcare workers, because there's going to be a huge exodus of workers exiting the industry due to ethics and practices that these corporations are doing.
Yeah, increasingly hospitals are owned by a smaller and smaller number of companies. Rick Scott with his company really started this trend down in Florida, although I think you can trace it back to Nixon. But you know, these are just giant. They're like the Walmarts of the hospital industry.
Yeah, yes, and then what I want to say, Tom, you're on a great point. My company, its stock is Apple, Barrick Gold, and Bank of America combined.
Wow.
Okay. Now, this is hospice. Okay.
You're dealing with dying people. Yeah.
Yes, and you know, with ties with Frist in the Senate, my CEO, and I'm putting my neck out, but it's too much. You know, yeah. I'm barely making $15 an hour, and not even getting an 8-hour day. But look at these profits that they're making.
Right. Yeah, the Frist family are billionaires from their hospital empire.
Yeah.
Just like Rick Scott is a billionaire from his hospital empire, or a multimillionaire, hundreds of millions of dollars. Ben, thank you. Thank you for that story. It's great to hear from you, and thank you for calling from Wilmington.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your thoughts on how we deal with poverty, inequality, and the crime that comes along with it in our society after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by France Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. We're kind of crowdsourcing, brainstorming solutions to the problem of inequality in the United States, crime that comes as a result of that, the social breakdown that comes, the crime is a symptom of. People think of crime as a core thing in and of itself, like it just magically appears out of nothing, like a weed in your lawn. Well, the weed appears in your lawn because a seed got there and because the soil can nurture it. Crime doesn't come out of nothing either. Crime comes out of inequality, crime comes out of despair, crime comes out of opportunity in some cases. But at the bottom line, crime comes out of a lack of social fabric. It comes out of the breakdown of society. And we are seeing that hugely in the United States right now, and other developed countries, not so much. Why? Well, it's because we're the most unequal society in the developed world, period. Way beyond anybody else. So what do we do about that? Picking up your thoughts. Rhonda in Charleston, West Virginia. Hey, Rhonda, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Yes. I think I got a kind of a unique perspective on this. I taught high school for 34 years. I've come from the state that has the highest poverty, most least educated state in the nation. Mm-hmm. And after seeing more and more children graduate from high school, less of our children are having to find a way to go to college. Even our trade schools have become competitive. When I grew up in the 70s, not anybody could go to a trade school. Now it's gotten to the point, at least here, where it's become competitive even to go to a trade school. These children are graduating, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, without a clear path as to how to start their life, and they're hopeless. They're full of despair because it's a time when they're going to start their life. And you come here to Southern West Virginia, and you're really going to see a lot of poverty and no way to get out. These people can't just move out. Our biggest employer is Walmart. I mean, so we're not giving people I don't think criminals want to be criminal. I don't think they start out that way. But there is a point where, these kids or these young people are saying, I have to live. And so I think that we need to start looking at how are we giving our people a path in order to make a living and to make their way in life. So I don't know what your idea is on that, but
yeah, no, that's a really important point, Rhonda, and that is, this goes back to my original in my original rant in the first hour, where I said I really think that there are 4 things that we need to say are just core structural pillars to a functioning, developed society. And that is that everybody has access to health care that isn't going to bankrupt them, that everybody has access to education that isn't going to bankrupt them, everyone has access to housing that isn't going to bankrupt them, and everyone has access to enough food. And not just, food desert food, not just Cheetos, but, the stuff that you can buy in a 7-Eleven. I mean, there are literally parts of America where for a 10-mile radius or a 20-mile radius, the only food available is at dollar stores or 7-Elevens. I'm talking about real food.
We have whole counties with no grocery stores at all.
Exactly.
I mean, whole counties.
And what does that lead to? Obesity and type 2 diabetes and heart disease and processed and cancer. Processed food jacks up your risk of cancer. It leads to all these terrible outcomes. So if we could just establish the floor, those 4 items as a basic floor, those, by the way, were the key components of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program that has been just whittled away at ever since the Reagan presidency. But if we just could do those 4 things and lift people up a little bit to reestablish a middle class in America and reestablish social trust among people, and then diminish this massive wealth at the top where we're not seeing, what was it, a couple of years ago, it was Larry Ellison and some other billionaire were competing to see who could have the biggest yacht. Is it 435 feet or 485 feet? And now it's, who can have the biggest rocket ship to blast themselves into outer space. And people are watching this and going, what the hell? I can't feed my family, and I'm supposed to be cheering this guy, who paid 1% in income taxes last year, blasting off into outer space. It's mind-boggling. So, Rhonda, you nailed it. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Randy in Atlanta. Randy, your thoughts?
Hello?
Hey, Randy, you're on the air.
No, it's not Randy. This is Rudy.
Oh, it's Rudy. I'm sorry. You're right, Rudy. Yeah, my error.
No, you're fine. Hey, Tom, it's like any other problem. We have to admit it, that we have a serious issue, and racism is at the top of the heap. When racism is sold as a product, in which that's what it's being sold in this country, and you have too many people that has bought into it, meaning you have a lot of white people that still believe that if I buy into this theory that I'm better than anyone else and that I'm supposed to have, then people are not going to do what they are, back to that saying as kids, they're not going to do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
So when I look at people like Trump and the people of his ilk, I mean, it's disturbing, Tom. People like Trump have to be just taken out of the mix because they're selling lies and they're destroying everything good about human race.
when you really
and I'm assuming, Rudy, you do not mean that in any way that implies violence.
No. It's not about violence, Tom. It's about doing what's socially.
Yeah.
It's about doing what is right socially. And this tears down everyone, especially the ones that believe in it. Because if these people keep believing that, oh, I got all the marbles and no one's going to eat, you keep on eating a steak out in the middle of nowhere and watch what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Well said, Rudy. Thank you very much. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Oh, Professor, I'm getting an A in this class. The question on the floor is, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
No problem. We start with services. What's another way of saying homelessness? No services. Look here. My mother has some problems. We call her Mommy has some problems, but they had services back then. The patriarch in my family was an alcoholic, a veteran, but we had a place to take, Papa Bear,
Mm-hmm.
So, but we ain't got them services today. Now, I think what we need to do, we need to make America great again. That's right, I said it. Go back to 1958, 1959. The corporate tax rate was 92%. Now, what did that do? That kept money in circulation. They couldn't hoard money. Now, what's your best investment? You got to go to education. I remember when the United States led the world in education.
Yep.
Now our students are in loan debt. I remember when California was number second in the United States. Now we 48. The teacher I heard to say 40. She's number 48, number 49. The worst. Gee whiz, my Lord, we all down there. Now, what's going on here? We got to think of opposition politics. We didn't have that when you was a young man. We get it big time now, and they're surrogates of the devil. Why? Because they're authors of confusion. All right, and they operate on a double standard, and they're food of choice. That's their food of choice. Confusion, double standards. They got mouthpieces. They got lobbyists. They got judges. They got public officials. Let me tell you what else. They got organizations. They got your Koch brothers, your Federalist Foundation, your Heritage Society. These people are not for democracy. Now I'm going to tell you how we can beat them. Ain't but one way out. More people got to vote. The big blue wave will defeat anything, and that includes gerrymandering. Call me crazy. Talk to you later.
No, Morris, you need your own YouTube channel or TikTok or whatever it may be, because Morris, you got the greatest rants. And Morris just hung up. He just delivers his rants and amazing. I love Morris's rants. Joan in San Francisco. Hey, Joan, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Hi. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about how in San Francisco there's a plan to reduce the number of toilets for the homeless.
Why?
I just found out about it yesterday. It doesn't say why. It says that this month the city's plan to substantially reduce access to public toilets across San Francisco, targeting locations with high concentrations of unhoused San Franciscans, was unveiled.
Is this to discourage people from pitching their tents near the public toilets?
Absolutely, and it's not just that. They have a no-sit-and-lie law in San Francisco that was put in by something like a business improvement district, not necessarily the local people. And they have removed every place that people can sit down. The benches, they actually hacked off a concrete bench off a wall at Buena Vista Park because young people sat there. And they removed all the logs.
See, this is dealing with the symptoms of a problem rather than the causes.
Well, it's worse than that. It's hostile architecture. There's a hatefulness about it. You can't sit down. You can't get water to give your dog. There's no place to go to the bathroom. I mean, I went to the public restroom last week and at 7:30. That's supposed to close at 8, and it was already closed. And it's very awful, and they put rocks under the trees so people can't sit there in this new section that they just opened up on near Stanyan Street,
it's just
Stanyan
incredible.
and Haight, and they've got these big carpets of rocks.
Wow. I know the area. I used to, in the summer of '68, I lived on Fell Street right off Haight. Yeah, just a couple blocks in the corner of Haight and Ashbury. Joan, thank you. Thanks for the report and the information. This is terrible. Thank you, Joan. We need to do something.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We need to do something deep and systemic. We need to look at the causes of this problem, not just the symptoms. And welcome back. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. Hearing a lot of great stuff here today. A lot of real kind of pinpoint ideas.
Yeah.
And to deal with all of it, I mean, you really put it out there. I mean, crime and homelessness and inequality and racism and yada, yada. But if there is one single policy change that we could make in America, it would be to look to the nation that trained Christopher Columbus on how to find America, and that was Portugal. And we need to end our war on drugs. Its tentacles reach out and touch everything.
Yeah, we've done that here in Oregon. We decriminalized all possession of small amounts of all drugs in Oregon.
Well, and we'll get a decade of that, and we'll see how crime rates have plummeted there, because they're sure to, just as they have in Portugal. And if you think about the way whole families are affected generationally, and it's not, if you take drug war as a term of a policy, you have problems that come from the drugs for sure, largely manageable and largely individualized if you look at drug problems. But if you look at the war problems, those are systemic and societal. And you hit on something earlier when, you're trying to find a term for it. Kenyatta had said something about, well, what do we want equality to look like? Or do we want these people to achieve the sameness of wealthy white people? And later on, you responded to somebody about having agency. And I think an extension of that is having dignity. And the individual identifies that for themselves. And there's a lot more people who are not really motivated by money than most people would think, but they find their dignity elsewhere. I mean, we revere people who, take up the cloth and vow poverty and things like that. We see that as so noble. And yet in our competitive, consumerist, capitalistic paradigm, people have to chase money just to survive, and there's no room or time left for dignity. So I think an end to the war on drugs and a universal basic income, those two policies, and you let people have their own minds freely and have some time freely, and I think you would see business fertilizer and little micro mini businesses all over the country.
What you're talking about, Eric, is what is in Scandinavia and most of Europe. I mean, it's just this is.
I'm headed there.
Yeah, this is
I've been telling you for years. I'm waiting out this lawsuit, and I'm moving to Europe as soon as it's over.
I get it. And your thing on the war on drugs is so spot on. When I was a little kid, I mean, like 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. I had 3 best friends. Three. There was 4 boys. 4 of us who used to hang out together. And one of us, when he turned 17, I think it was.
You're the guy who went to prison, your buddy.
He got busted with some pot, and they sent him to prison for 2 years, and he came back shattered. I mean, shattered.
I'm a felon. I'm a felon because I forged my own prescriptions 20-some years ago, before the whole opioid epidemic was a familiar term.
Yeah.
I was one of the first casualties.
So you know
of that,
exactly what I'm talking about.
It ended my career.
And I know what you're talking about. Eric, thank you. Thank you. Spot on, and very well said. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just 1 minute here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We have to do something. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. So we're talking about what do we do about crime in America, and to what extent is crime actually a symptom of larger societal problems, the largest being massive inequality. But there's all kinds of other structural things. We have, since the Reagan Revolution, eroded public housing, low-income housing. We have eroded the ability of people to get health care without going bankrupt. We have pretty much done away with the ability to go to college, any kind of meaningful college, without ending up in such debt that you can't start a family or buy a house. And increasingly across America, we're seeing food deserts where people actually don't even have access to nutritional food. It is nuts, and we need to do something about it. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in on this, on the poverty, despair, like the teacher from West Virginia. She was describing me back in we're the same age, Tom, and I compare myself to you. At 17, you were a DJ, doing good. On the other side of the coin, I was starting my addiction on alcohol. For what? Because inequality, right? The name calling. There's a racist component to it. I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. And there's a book I want to suggest to you, Tom, if you want to read it. It's called Always Running, Luis J. Rodriguez. He grew up in a couple miles down from where I did, the gang situation. But he got out of it, wrote a book, describes how I grew up. The law enforcement, they look at you, no respect. You just a brown skin, throwaway. And then when you have that mindset, you don't have no respect for society.
Right.
I thought of, what do I do if my family was in need? A drug deal, and I don't like to think of that. And you know what? Jobs, union jobs. Okay, do the opposite of what Reagan did. Bring back health care for those that need it. I sure needed it, but you know what? Alcohol served their purpose. Alcohol and drugs are just a symptom of what's going on.
Yep.
It doesn't. It affects the whites, every color, right?
Right, but it affects historically discriminated against communities worse than it does white communities, right across the board.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and in our community, if you want the corporate, wow, honest, where you should have graduated, where did you do time? They asked me. I never did time. I was lucky.
Yeah.
A little county, glass house, but never, that was the pride in that community. Because that's all we were good for. We were hard workers. We had to break out of that. And in the community, they need, say, counseling, right? Where I grew up, counseling, right? Therapy, mental health in schools.
Yes.
Because I got a daughter, 38, with my granddaughter, will be 8 years old in a couple of weeks, homeless, but they live with us.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay. You know what? I can give back.
Yeah.
I'll help anybody. My neighbor, I'm growing, garden. You need something? Here.
Yeah.
And that's all. Bringing compassion, empathy, and understanding. And how about using the golf courses for the homeless? I heard that from George Carlin years ago.
Oh, yeah.
A little white ball. Yeah. Right? They already got facilities there. Yeah, think about it.
I like that.
The greedy people. I used to hit a golf ball with a baseball bat, how far I can get it.
Yeah.
It's just surviving, Tom. And I'm lucky I'm here. You had 3 brothers. Mine are gone. And I'm the eldest.
Oh, my.
A lot of it addiction. Well, we're raised by a World War II dad.
Yeah.
That tells you something.
Same here. Yeah.
And I hope nobody goes through that. You know what I mean? So, but bless you, Tom, what you do. And the rest of the crew, your wife, I have to include them all. I get a little manic, your union. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. You always bring it back to compassion and caring for each other as fellow human beings, and it's so important. Thank you so much. Nancy in Chihuahua, Washington. Hey, Nancy. Hey, we have about a minute and a half here
Tom,
before we have to wrap up. Well, I'm fine. What's up?
Clubhouse programs. They're huge. Fountain House is the biggest one in New York City.
What is a Clubhouse program?
Housing. Huh?
I'm sorry. You were going to start telling me. I was saying, what is a Clubhouse program?
Clubhouse program is where they ease people with a history of mental illness back into working. And also they have a homeless program where they sign the leases on apartments, and then they guarantee the rent, and then they put mentally ill people in the apartments, and they all share the rent and pay it to Fountain House, not for profit or anything, and they've expanded so much. They own apartment buildings now, and co-ops and all kinds of things. And that they've been doing great, but in a lot of the red states, the psychiatry industry tries to undermine them and shut them down because, one, they could treat hundreds of or thousands of clients with just one PhD psychiatrist that heads the program. And they get the chronics off the street, and that a lot of these outpatient clinics depend on the chronics.
That's remarkable.
But the thing is, Fountain House, they don't do counseling or meds, and they encourage their clients to do it outpatient.
Nancy, I've written it down.
Psychiatry doesn't like them.
I've written it down. I will do a deep dive after we get off the air. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much from all of you. Thank you. We'll be back. Greg Palast is going to tell us about Haiti right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this local direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet No. 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. We've been talking about crime and poverty and inequality in the United States and how bad it is. Well, and we'll get back to those conversations, and I'll be picking up your phone calls here in about 10 minutes. But all of that is, in our conversation up to this point has been, centered on the United States. But there are other places around the world that are plagued by the same problem, where you have rich people who are essentially predatory, who extract as much wealth as possible from everybody else. And then you have this massive inequality, and then that tears apart social fabric and destroys social trust. And then you have crime. And I mean, it's being repeated all over the world. And now, right off our coast, one of the countries that has been chronically going through this kind of a problem. When I interviewed the former Prime Minister of Haiti last week on this program, I believe I pointed out to him that our organization, with this German organization I was working with, tried to start a project with Haiti, and the government minister that we were dealing with would not work with us unless we paid him a bribe. I mean, this is how terrible it was there. And yet, this is in large part the problems there are in large part a creation of the United States. And I didn't even know, and Greg Palast is with us, our old buddy, the investigative journalist, the author of How Trump Stole 2020, gregpalast.com, of course, his website, Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, I didn't know until I read your piece, and I'm sure somebody has mentioned it somewhere, that George W. Bush dragged us into another, what would you call it? Opportunistic, imperialistic, whatever, involvement in Haiti.
It's a coup d'etat. I mean, he wasn't satisfied with stealing his own election. So in 2004, Haiti, after the U.S. backed a dictatorship for 28 years, Baby Doc and Papa Doc Duvalier, we backed a dictatorship. They finally elected a president, the Catholic priest Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And then we fomented a group of characters, a gang which called themselves the Cannibals. And I guess that Bush's PR people said, no, give yourself another name. So they changed the name from Cannibals to the National Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Haiti. Bush sent in 1,000 Marines and went to the office of President Aristide and said, "You're going, you're out." So again, he was stealing his second election in the U.S., so he decided to steal Haiti's while he was at it with 1,000 Marines. And by the way, Aristide, when the Marines broke into his office, was reading a book called "The Best Democracy Money Can Buy."
Seriously, your book?
Asked me to Yeah, and so I know that because he asked me if I could send him another copy because the Marines took it from him.
Oh my God!
So I'm not kidding.
Is he still alive?
So he was. Oh, indeed, he just returned this weekend back to Haiti. He's in his 90s. He was recovering from COVID in Cuba, and so what happened was, besides after the 1,000 Marines were sent in, and we replaced him with another puppet. He ultimately came back, anyway, go right ahead if you have other questions about.
Well, no, my recollection is that President Aristide was what today we would call a social democrat or democratic socialist, somebody who believed in democracy, but also believed that you have to have a strong social safety net in order to have a society work, and just like or similarly. It wasn't the Contras, it was the Sandinistas in Central America, who were ending up, ultimately having to align themselves with Cuba and the Soviet Union because we were just trashing them. Who were saying, we're
embargoes, yes,
yeah, we're all in favor of democracy. We just want to have a strong social safety net. And the Reagan administration and others, but specifically Ronald Reagan said, strong social safety net that's socialism, that's communism. You can't have that. I mean, it was like the record that he made for the AMA back in the 1960s, about Medicare, saying someday we'll look back and remember when men were free. But I also recall that Aristide lived far more humbly than his predecessors, than the Duvaliers, and made a point of that, that he put into place a lot of very positive social changes in Haiti. What happened to those?
Well, what happened is the U.S. imposed an embargo because, unlike the Duvaliers, which we kept in power, he didn't steal billions. He lived poor. He was very humble, and but the nation was busted, especially because it was devastated. 80% of the foreign aid was looted by the Duvaliers. The U.S. cut off aid, so he turned to Venezuela, which gave the nation over $2 billion plus low-cost oil in their program created by Hugo Chavez called PetroCaribe. Now, the lately deceased president, Moises, who was murdered last week, or a week and a half ago, he looted some of that money brought in by Venezuela, according to the Haitian Supreme Court, one of the few institutions which is still honest and functioning. We have to understand there's a long history here. I mean, then they had the earthquake of 2010. We were supposed to bail them out. Instead, Obama created something called the Bush-Clinton Haitian Relief Fund. You can tell by just the name that it's a grifter operation, which tried to set up some beach resorts for white tourists, but nothing for the Haitians. You have to understand that today, 67% of the people of Haiti, 67% earn $2 a day or less.
Whoa!
And this tragedy has a long history, and by the way, it didn't help that in 1791, Toussaint Louverture led the first successful mass slave uprising that led to the creation of Haiti.
Yeah.
In the Americas. And what happened was the French government. This is the first time that we had reparations for slavery. What it was the slaves in Haiti were required to pay $21 billion in payments to the French slaveholders, to the French government and the slaveholders, for the loss of their so-called property, that is, the citizens of Haiti. And that continued through 1947. So literally they were paying, the slaves are paying, the former enslaved people were paying their slaveholders in France. That finally came to an end, but not the economic slavery. That was replaced by another form of economic slavery called the IMF, which said since Haiti's poor, what they need to do is impose an austerity program and privatize all their industries, water, electricity, et cetera, so there's no water or electricity. So this is a nation we have brutalized. When I say, not you and me, Tom, and not your listeners, but we've
all been participants in the system that has brutalized them. I mean, and that gives us, I think, an obligation to do or say something about it. I had, the Aristide part of the history of Haiti, I knew at the time. I mean, I was alive and paying attention to the media, but was not top of mind for me recently. I didn't realize that you knew Jean-Baptiste Aristide, if I'm saying it right. Jean-Baptiste
and Aristide, and he was taken off to a French colony in Africa, and he was able to get away and return, get reelected. It's interesting. The U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, this guy Moise, and by the way, no one in Haiti, not me, and no one in Haiti is thrilled about the idea that their president was gunned down.
Right.
But the truth is, he was a rump president. His term in office ended last year.
Right.
And he refused to leave office.
He pulled a Trump.
Yeah, and what happened was that the U.S. State Department backed him in holding on to office. Yeah. This guy who was, in fact, not only was he stealing the aid money given by Venezuela, but he was using some of that money to pay off gangs. The place is controlled by the G9, which means the 9 gangs. And he was paying the 9 gangs to beat up anti-government demonstrators.
Amazing.
Gun some down.
Craig, I understand that Haiti is going to be having elections soon. We're almost out of time here, by the way. Is there another Aristide, another democratic socialist who has the possibility of winning that election and putting that country back together and hopefully without the United States interfering again?
Oh, there are really good activists who are following, Aristide was a liberation theologist, and there are the poverty priests there still there who are working hard and putting their lives on the line, whether they stand a chance or whether we are going to continue to back governments which are themselves backed by gangs, literally the 9 gangs. That's the real issue. Whether Haiti will ever be allowed to be free, I don't know.
Yeah, it's such a tragedy, and another example. I mean, our involvement in Iraq, our involvement in Iran, our involvement in Haiti, our involvement in you just pick a country, right? Central America. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com, the website. Great op-ed that Greg put together with the whole timeline of Haiti. You can check it out. Greg, thanks a lot. It's great talking with you.
You're very welcome, Tom. Bye.
Thank you. Greg Palast, a former BBC reporter and with The Guardian.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your thoughts on how we deal with inequality and crime, the symptom of inequality in the United States, right after this. And welcome back. Aaron in Tacoma. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you this afternoon?
I am great, but I'll get better, Aaron. What's up?
Good. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Just wanted to talk about inequality and how that affects society. And I heard a caller talking about the corporate greed of healthcare. Mm-hmm. And the corporate greed of healthcare is ultimately affecting our society, as you see in Portland with the mental health crises, the tents, the homelessness, and the breakdown in that matter. Mm-hmm. That is America and society being greedy, not supplying healthcare to all. That only doesn't affect mental health, but that affects every aspect of the body, especially considering the fact that we all pay out the wazoo for health insurance, and that does not cover dental, vision, hearing. Is that not part of our human body? Should we have to pay separately for another insurance on our body?
You are singing my song, Aaron. I just yesterday I just got a copy of my next book. I got to have a physical copy in my hand here. The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. It won't be available for sale for another month or so. But I just got a copy, and everything you just said is in that. The research that I did for that book just completely blew my mind about how bad things are in the United States, how they got this way, what a huge role race played in getting them this way, among other things. Go ahead.
It's unbelievable, Tom, and it's the lobby. It's the lobbyists that control our government, that control the healthcare industry. And that includes the dental lobby, the vision lobby, et cetera. I've been a healthcare worker for 14 years, and I love working with patients. I love community. But the healthcare industry is broken. It is only there for the people at the top, and all they're looking out for is their profits and not caring about patients. If people remember, when a doctor becomes a physician, you have to take a Hippocratic oath. And that is to look out for the patients and not yourself. It's always to be the patients. We don't look at healthcare like that in today's age. All we look at is a patient is a number and a monetary figure, and that is wrong.
Yeah. I'm completely with you.
Absolutely wrong. And the healthcare industry is only going to get worse because people aren't going to want to work in it because of that reason. Of that greed is going to scare people away that actually have compassion and passion for humans.
Well, this is the thing. Starting in the 1980s, prior to the 1980s, to the best of my knowledge, every state in the union, there may be an outlier here that I didn't find, but as far as I can tell, every state in the union required health insurance companies to be nonprofits and hospitals to be nonprofits. And I was, I grew up in Michigan, and in the early 70s, we had an herbal tea company, and we had a little factory. We had 18 people working for us, me and my partner, Terry O'Connor. And we provided health care to everybody. It was Blue Cross Blue Shield. It cost $30 per month per employee. I remember it quite well. And
they probably had no deductible at that time.
No, there was nothing. And you could see any doctor anytime, and you could go anywhere in the hospitals. And now the 3 hospitals in Lansing, St. Lawrence, Sparrow, and Ingham Medical are now. Ingham Medical is no longer owned by Ingham County. It's now a private corporation. They changed the name. Sparrow and St. Lawrence have both become for-profit. The health insurance companies have all become for-profit. The prices are through the roof, and I guarantee you, the $30 per month per person that I used to pay for health insurance doesn't even cover deductibles today. I mean,
No, that wouldn't even cover a doctor's visit, Tom. It is a crying shame that we live in this kind of society.
I am with you. Aaron, thank you for the call. Thank you. That was brilliant. We'll be right back.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. What do we do about poverty? What do we do about all of these problems? This is a multidimensional, multifactorial issue that, in my opinion, we find the roots of in the neoliberal turn that America took in 1980 when we embraced Reaganism and Reaganomics. And we are still in the Reaganism-Reaganomics era. We have not yet repudiated it. We have not yet raised the top tax rate on the very, very richest above 50%, like it was before Reagan came into office. We have not raised the corporate tax rate up into the 30s and 40% for those corporations that are essentially printing money, like we did before Reagan came into office. We have not made it easier for people to form labor unions across the United States. In fact, if anything, we've made it much, much harder, and we've destroyed unionization. We have not strengthened the social safety net, which Lyndon Johnson did in the era from 1965 through 1968 with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Well, Social Security, he expanded children's health insurance programs, food stamps, Section 8 housing, low-income housing, construction of new housing. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of programs that were part of what was called the Great Society. Some people refer to it as the Second Reconstruction. There was this whole series of programs that were designed to help out people who were the victims, essentially, of well, it wasn't called Reaganism at that point yet, but of the Republican efforts back in the 1920s. And the whittling away of the New Deal. The Franklin Roosevelt did an awful lot of great stuff in the 1930s and the early 1940s, and then we just started whittling away at it. And LBJ not just put it back together, but built it even larger. And over the last 40 years, what have we seen? The gradual but consistent and steady destruction of all of it. David in Monterey, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yes, sir. I think that communities need to make fair rules for the citizens to live together, and fair rules, and that would help make sure that the homeless keep their areas clean, that they can live. And somebody talked about community centers, and I think they should have adult community centers where they teach people to do penny capitalism, like beading work and any kind of other type of thing that they can make money on their own, maybe a day labor place, and a path to school for those that can go to school. And that way we could live together as a community instead of fighting against that community, and raise people up out of that homeless situation, and take a sense of pride in our homeless situation instead of treating them like they're the enemy. Or like Seattle, we rode up to Seattle, and they had put the homeless in these little camps, and then they left them alone so that the bullies would run the camps, and they allowed the trash to build up so that they can go in and say, oh, this ain't working, and we'll just take everything out. We actually need fair rules that are spelled out and community outreach. The police could be used as a outreach to the homeless, not somebody to come and hit them with a club or chase them from one place to another. And the last point is, if you have enough sleep, you can deal with anything. If you don't get enough sleep, you cannot deal with nothing.
Yeah.
And that's my rant.
It's a good rant, David, and I completely get it. And I think that, you know, a big piece of this is simply providing housing to homeless people. You know, it's New York City did some of this during the pandemic, where they actually were using some of the hotels that were vacant as housing for homeless people, and now they're making some of that permanent, actually. And you know, we need services. This is you know, somebody earlier said, I think it was Morris, said services. You know, the key to it. Provide people with health care, provide them with education, provide them with addiction treatment, provide them with mental health treatment, provide them, most importantly, with a place to live and food to eat. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the right-wing billionaires would really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America? That a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is such a large topic. I think that Sharon Lee wrote a piece for shelterforce.org about what Seattle is up to and what they're doing, how they're building tiny houses for homeless people. And as of this moment, they are housing close to 1,000 people in these. 879. That was just during 2018. The villages served 879 homeless men, women, and children. Of the 491 who exited the villages, a total of 166 or 34% were successful in obtaining permanent housing. If you include the people who moved into transitional housing, that takes it up to 42%. This is great stuff. I mean, Seattle is doing, apparently has a great start on this, and I want to get more detail on that as time goes on. Loretta is speaking of Seattle, in Seattle. Hey, Loretta, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to your comment about the food deserts and the contribution to the different diseases and illnesses.
Malnutrition, yeah.
And the reality that we're dealing with is the fact that the unhealthy benefit the wealthy, and as long as we have the healthcare system that we have, there's no incentive for the people benefiting off of the unhealthy to change that.
Yeah, my old friend Don Hoy, who ran the Creative Health Institute before he died, a long story, but anyhow, he used to say every cancer diagnosis is $250,000 for the healthcare industry. So why would they be working to stop cancer? I mean, which is a totally cynical statement, but it's also in the perhaps at the human view, it's not 100% right, but in the macro, in economics they refer to it as perverse incentives. We have a system that incentivizes sickness rather than incentivizes wellness, and one of the reasons why countries in Europe and in South Asia, in Asia, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. One of the reasons why they have large public health programs to discourage smoking, encourage good eating, encourage good access to a wide variety of fresh foods, encourage exercise, is because it reduces their healthcare costs, which for them is good. Whereas if you try to do that, with the old hospital chain that Senator Rick Scott used to own, or the other hospital chain that former Senator Bill Frist used to own, it hurts their bottom line if you make people healthier. So, I think you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. Thank you very much for the call. Lauren in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Lauren, what's up?
Well, about the homeless problem, it's really it's horrible here. And I can't even go to the grocery store these days without somebody approaching me in the parking lot asking for help because they don't have money to pay for the electricity or for food.
Yeah.
So, we've got some programs that are aimed at trying to help, using empty hotels and things like that, but it's just a drop in the bucket. The other day, I was driving around in Scottsdale, and I saw a sign that was up by the freeway, and it was encouraging people not to give anything to panhandlers.
An official sign?
It was, an official sign from the city of Scottsdale.
Yeah. It's the idea that by giving money to panhandlers, you're encouraging them to continue panhandling. But again, they're dealing with a symptom rather than the problem. What is it that creates panhandlers? Deep poverty. What creates deep poverty? It's a tearing of the social fabric. We just have to recognize this. We are looking at the fabric of this country over a 40-year period of Reaganism being just literally ripped apart. Well, not literally, but metaphorically ripped apart. And we have to address this. We have to address this in a multidisciplinary way, and we have to do a good job of doing it, frankly, and we're not doing any of that. Loretta,
and people who are homeless, they're the victims of crimes more often than not. We talk about crime and homelessness. There was a woman, I was in the emergency room not too long ago. The woman next to me, she was crying her eyes out because she didn't have a home to return to. Someone had attempted to rape her right before she got to the hospital, and they just threw her out.
Wow. This should not be in the United States. The richest nation in the world. We should not have these kinds of stories being told. Lauren, thank you. Thank you for your contribution to the conversation. It was brilliant. Bill in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Tom, the problem isn't that we ignore the problems. The problem is that we ignore the simple solutions. All the problems we don't ignore. We can name them. They have names. We've identified them. Hunger. There's an invasive species swimming up our American rivers. What gets thrown away today could feed the masses. We ignore the solutions. The hungry people at the border, could help us gather up that invasive species and create an economy that can go to both sides of the border and help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Poverty. Wait a second, please. I'm sorry.
Sure.
But poverty. Poverty, the solution to poverty is money. Where do we get money? We know where to get money. We've done it before. You've mentioned it. It's called a estate tax. 1/10 of 1%. 1/10 of 1% of $1 billion, Tom, is $1 million. The stock market creates $50 billion a day. That's $50 million. That if you're trading it at percentages of less than 1/10 of 1%, a dime on $100, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, the answers are there, Tom.
Yeah.
As far as housing, we can build housing that now marijuana is going to be legal. We got to grow hemp like it's going out of style. An 18-inch thick hemp block has an R value of 41. You can live in an R41 home in the desert and never need air conditioning, or very likely need air conditioning. You could live in the stark winters and hardly need heat. I mean, the answers are there. There are simple solutions to them, and we have to just stop ignoring them.
I'm with you. Bill, thank you. Jamie in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hey, Jamie, your thoughts?
Hi. So I think that the three main things that people need access to in order to be able to stay off of the streets, first of all, is food, because we know that without food, there's a sense of hopelessness and despair that comes, and it's going to force them into situations of crime, which is just going to spiral out of control. Second is education, and I'm talking about from kindergarten all the way on to college. Mm-hmm. They need access to equal education and well-funded education so that they do have options when they grow up. When these kids grow up, they have options for their family other than stealing. And finally, we need a healthcare system, specifically mental health, that everyone can access, and one that does not treat mental illness as an acute problem. Because currently in the United States, mental illness is treated as an acute problem. You might get hospitalized for a week if you're willing, or if the circumstances are bad enough, and then they just throw you back out there, hopefully with a prescription that you may or may not be able to afford. And it's really not solving anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I believe the solution to all of this is to get money out of politics and corporations out of politics, because not only are they stealing all that money from the people that need it, but they're also spreading all this rhetoric that you need to work for what you get, and desensitizing people to thinking that it's okay to let people starve to death or suffer because they're not working.
Yeah, I am with you, Jamie, and I mean, that was one of the more comprehensive analyses that I've heard, and you did a great job. Thank you so much for that, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM there in Salt Lake City. And I would say, again, to point to where this all began, one of the things that Jamie was talking about was education. People need good quality education from kindergarten through college. And we had that in the United States prior to 1980. Just ask any old fart like me, who came up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they will tell you, you could go to any college that you could, you had to have a certain skill level to get in, obviously, or trade schools were widely available, unions trained people, and then what did Reagan do? He put Bill Bennett in charge of the education department. And we began deconstructing education across the United States. This is going to be the 360. We began deconstructing education across the United States. And who is Bill Bennett? Bill Bennett is the guy who said this.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do. But your crime rate would go down.
That was the Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan. This is where it began. And this is what it has brought us to. And yeah, there's a racial component to it, obviously, as well as a class component, as well as a greed component, as well as it's tearing our society apart, and we have to do something about that. We'll be back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Let's brainstorm solutions here. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Leslie in Alhambra, California. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to point out that if you're on the bottom, the truth is crime does pay. If you look at what's happened in our society, like the Trump family did with their university, he took in $52 million. He only paid $24 out. He's no penalty for him. Right. If you look at what happened with the opioid crises, those people made billions of dollars and only paid a fraction back.
Yeah, the Sackler family.
Does pay.
Yeah.
Crime does pay if you're in the white-collar area.
And the penalties are minimal. And they go after, well, as in the case of the Sacklers, the most deadly drug dealers in the history of the United States, no member of that family is being held personally accountable in any criminal way whatsoever. The company is pleading guilty to several criminal charges, but, you can't put a company in jail. In fact, the company's, in bankruptcy right now to avoid having to cover the costs. Yeah, very well said, Leslie. Thank you. Scott in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I'd like to say how much I enjoy Professor Wolf every week. He's great. But 95% of the people in the country do not understand how rich people are. If you take Jeff Bezos, they've estimated that his worth is worth $200 billion. And most investment counselors will say that if you take 4% of your investment every year, your investment account will continue to grow. I'm a little more conservative with that, so I figure 3%. If Jeff Bezos gets 3% of his $200 billion a year, he gets $6 billion a year. Every 2 months, he becomes another billionaire. If he could clone himself 6 times a year, he could make himself another billionaire every 2 months.
Right, and it's almost impossible to spend $1 billion a year. I mean, you have to do things like build rocket ships and blast yourself into outer space.
The most expensive, I went on the internet and I found the most expensive yacht that I could find on the internet was $300 million. He could buy 20 of those a year and not touch his investments.
Principal. Yeah, and that's assuming.
I mean, it's crazy.
It is, and now we get this report that in fact, I got it this morning from one of these inequality groups. I don't recall which one, saying that if you paid $5 in income taxes in 2014, I believe it was, maybe 2011, you paid more income taxes than Jeff Bezos, the guy who just blasted himself into outer space, and that the media is like, oh, look at this billionaire, isn't he cool? And I'm looking at it, it's like, really? I mean, Amazon is a reasonably good company in some ways, and they've certainly have been a useful thing for many Americans during the pandemic. But their labor practices are just.
But he wouldn't be hurt one iota if he had to pay taxes.
He wouldn't be hurt one iota if he let his employees get unionized either. I mean, it's incredible. Scott, thank you. 10 minutes before the hour, back in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench. And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Kadia, am I saying that right, in San Francisco?
Yep, that's correct.
Hey, Kadia, what's up?
Good. Hi. I just wanted to add on, because I'm a nurse practitioner. I work in community health. I like a lot of the points that other callers have made, and also specifically with the policy one. A lot of these decisions that are made for unhoused individuals, they're not even a part of the process. So I think, on top of that, we should start treating, they should have a say in what type of resources should be given and how they should be allocated as well. I just wanted to, kind of throw that out there. Because there's a lot of draconian rules that come to play when you're staying at a hotel, or in Oakland, we have a lot of RV encampments. It's if you leave for a day, you can't come back for the next 3 days. So I just wanted to point out that we dehumanize individuals in this situation and unhoused situations, and often don't even ask for their input. And it's actually kind of amazing how well they organize themselves within their own communities. So there is hierarchy. There's method to the proverbial madness, and I think often people assume that everybody is just a drug addict or has mental health issues, and that's not always the case. And I just kind of wanted to throw that out there.
You did a brilliant job of that, and I think that on the let's do something spectrum, you've got people, the savior complex on one hand, and the conservatives with if we have to do this, we have to make it painful for people. On the other hand,
right.
and neither one of those actually says, let's go to the people themselves who need the help and ask them what they need.
Yeah, very rarely it happens, and the meetings where those do occur, they're usually not the, more important ones. And it's just simple things they won't change basic fire codes so that, or even provide fire extinguishers for encampments, because those are things so it's these weird red tape things that they'll get rid of the whole encampment versus giving them things to make the encampment safer.
Yeah.
So
I got it.
So yeah, so it's just
brilliant.
I really
Kaja.
appreciate this conversation.
Thank you. Well, and I appreciate your contribution to it. Thank you so much. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Paul, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, I just read recently, or reread, I should say, Aristotle's complete works, including The Politic. And
yikes.
What he describes in there in terms of the types of models of politics and the dysfunctions that can be sociological, demographic, geographic, economic, about all of them are happening in the United States right now. And he did say, I'll quote this, he says, poverty is the parent of crime and revolution. Right. So this supports your notion that if you're going to have crime and revolution, the crime is going to be to do what? To get something from, and the revolution is to get something from somebody who already has it. And this is why the Republicans are desperately trying to pass these voter obstructions in all these states, is because they know that, number one, the ultra-rich have stolen $30 trillion out of the economy, which is not circulating. That money's not circulating. That's the hole. That's our $30 trillion debt. And that's the hole that we have a junk food economy, and that money, that $30 trillion is in their coffers. It's not circulating. That would be the solution. By the way, in King County, Washington, where Seattle is, there's 100,000 homeless people. About 25,000, this is according to people that I know who are in this business, about 25,000 have applied for assistance, but they know there is 4 times that much. And the right-wingers who say, oh, these homeless who don't want to abide by the rules won't go to the shelters. Well, I asked somebody, how many beds are there in the shelters? And she told me about 5,000 to 7,000. So no matter what you say, there aren't even enough shelter beds to accommodate, 5% of them, even if these people wanted to play by the rules,
and then you get packed in like a barracks, and you lose all sense of privacy, and a lot of your sense of safety. Whereas at least in a little tent city, you can zip close your tent and have some semblance of privacy. I totally get it. Paul, I want to get one last caller in here. Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington. Janet, we have about a half a minute. You have a quick thought?
I do. And it's an honor to follow Paul in Woodinville because he's one of my heroes from your show. Also, I just want to say that I have a friend that worked in mental health as a mental health professional for many years, starting in the 70s. And she said that after Reagan was elected, it was almost immediate, the cuts that came. So it was as if they opened the hospital doors and said, there you go. We actually have a mental health facility in our town, and it's dilapidated and has been shut down for, most of it for many years. So there you go.
Got it. Janet, thank you. Bingo. I mean, you nailed it. And there we are. I mean, let's do something about this. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, as our old buddy Bernie used to say. Although a lot of, as our old buddy Barack Obama used to say, it requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Reach out to somebody today. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.